Hey guys, welcome back. BDC Care here. We're back with our weekly recap of all things Injustice. This is for the week of June 19th, 2025. The current challenge is Blackest Night Batman.
You were going to say Baddest Night.
I don't even know what I was going to say, but that sounds like as good of a guess as mine. That is a 1 week repeat. The required characters for that are Catwoman, Nightwing, and Joker, who you can get at bronze, and silver tier if you're looking at the lowest tier, the most easily accessible version of each of them, respectively.
And all the characters chosen are consistent with Batman.
Yeah, they're themed.
Yeah.
His passive is Surging Darkness, which is Batman deals more damage as his opponent's health depletes. Blackest Night characters receive an additional 10% unblockable chance for each Blackest Night member on their team. It's got 1,250 attack, 1,000 health. He was last available in June 6th of last year, so that's 2024. Just about a year ago, as always.
Right. And he's got medium, maybe a little bit on the higher end of medium stats. And so how his passive works, the first part, for every 1% of his enemies currently missing health, Batman does 1% increased damage.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the few characters in the game who has actually received a buff, more than a buff, a bunch of buffs. And we talked a bit about him during our Q&A a few days ago. One thing that I forgot to mention being buffed were his stats. His stats used to be 1,000 attack and 800 health. And even then, he was a little bit kind of weak. So they buffed him up with another, 450 more worth of base stats.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny is his passive used to be, I don't even remember if the name was the same, but it would still fit. He used to have boosted damage overnight.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a teammate passive because at the time, he was the only Blackest Night character. So back then, between midnight and 6, he would do 20% damage boost, or he would have 20% damage boost. And I guess before Gears, that was not awful, but Gears have sort of put the lie to that.
Yeah. With the new teammate passive, you can also have a 30% unblockable chance of all attacks with the full Blackest Night team, which is pretty solid. And I think the one thing we should talk about with the damage boost, I guess, is that it's a bit weird, right? Where it is kind of like, if you think about the average between like 100 and 0, right? You would imagine that it would be an approximately 50% damage boost in aggregate, right? But because of how specials and stuff works, you often will go from, 20%, 30% health to 0. So the only guaranteed amount of damage boost that you will always get in every fight is 0%, right? With him. So it ends up being sort of definitely better than midnight to 6 a.m., but not incredible. It's weird, but I think it's significant still.
I was planning talking about it a little bit later about how that works, but I feel like it's way better than that. And one place where I see this is that when I use his special 2 and he's a special specialist. So, all right, his special 2 is 3 hits, each of which can knock out the opponent. And with that passive doing more damage than the opponent's health depletes, I mean, it's hard to tell how much each hit is supposed to do. It feels like each part does about the same amount of damage, like 1/3 of the entire special. But then you'll see the numbers bump up with each hit.
That's true.
So with the current promotion of Blackest Night Batman, when it crits, each hit is about 100,000 damage. So we've geared him the usual. I guess I could talk about that some other time. But if he would be perfect if his special 2 is ranged. It's not, so you have to wait a little bit to make sure it hits. But if you walk him a little bit closer, he could potentially knock out 3 opponents. But he also has as long as you don't have invulnerability, he also has a much lower chance of not knocking them out.
That's true,
right? Because each hit, boom, boom, boom. It's always a little bit unsatisfying when you've got 1 or 2 hits left, and the opponent's not knocked out, and they have very little health, but your last few hits do tiny damage. I hate that. That's very frustrating.
That's fair, yeah.
Now, so he's got Master Death Cart, Tattoo Totem. We've done certain variations with him and this team. We've had him on a full Blackest Night team. This is not it, but I feel like he shines a little better. We tried him with Quake Engine. We tried him with Enchantress Companion Gear, and what you're watching is Claw of Horus. Claw of Horus is really good because he can shatter more than 1 gear with 1 special 1, even if he's not tagging in the middle of the Master's Death Cart, little pitter-patter hitting him. Quake Engine was good because it would do extra damage on a lot of opponents. It's just generally, even though he's not a damage over time guy, Quick Engine in general is really good only because even if they've got power, there's a chance it'll steal it. And once you've stolen it or they start off with no power or less than 1 bar of power, you're doing 50% extra damage.
Yeah.
With his unblockable chance, I mean, there's a good chance that even when blocked, at least one will break the block. And Enchantress Skulls, we typically used to help protect a character who can only knock out the opponent on the last hit of the special 2. And we don't need that. I mean, it still works really cool because he does so much damage, but we don't need that because if he's knocking them out, then he's pretty well covered. And then he's got an extra hit, maybe, that may not land, but keeps him from being subject to the opponent's tag-in effect. And so on a full Blackest Night team, which we've done before, it really the way you play it is that Flash should be the one who eats a special if you're trying to be careful and not take risks, because Flash has the largest potential health pool because of his passive. So it sort of costs him less to block a special. And the way we've got it set up, the way we had it set up previously, you gear one of them to be a tank, but it doesn't seem worth it since everybody revives on a Blackest Night team. Everybody's sort of tanky.
Yeah.
So we've gotten away from that only because in that team, Batman is not nearly as much of a star. In a lot of ways, Flash ends up being the star. Yeah. And you could try to do that with Batman and sort of mess around with the gear. But I feel like Rebirth, Raven, and Hawkgirl really makes him shine. And you can see when he's tagging in and doing some specials, just how much his output is. And sometimes when you see Rebirth Raven team, Rebirth Raven ends up doing more of the damage. And it happens every once in a while, but you can see how much Batman really is a star when you look at some of the damage stats at the end of the fight. And he's still out hitting Rebirth Raven.
Yeah. So there we go. This is week 60 since the end of our 4-year repeating challenge cycle. We are 6 weeks into what looks like a repeat so far. So we expect to see next week Antimatter Sinestro.
Right.
Next up, moving on to the multiplayer rewards, we have the Nightwing's Ninjato, which becomes the Brandished Ninjato. Its effects when it's maxed out is to retarget 90% of enemy area of affected damage to wielder of this item with 50% damage absorb, a 40% max health increase, a Nightwing specific ability, which is reflect 16% damage, and the evolved ability, which is give 300% of received area of affected damage as power. It was last available on the 14th of November of 2024. And next week, we expect to see Riddler's staff.
Right. As long as there's still a pattern, because this is the run where we had 2 interruptions, 2 corrections. We're sort of back on the usual, hopefully.
Yeah.
And I didn't start off this way. I'm a decent fan of the Ninjato now. It's definitely a defensive gear. And even though, in general, we like leaning heavily into offense, sometimes we have a defensive tank on our team, and it's pretty good. So sometimes we use it on Hawkgirl Prime, and we gear her as our tank to take away any of the harm that comes from the opponent doing splash damage. Hawkgirl, Ninjato, Astro Harness, that combination works really well, especially if on the team you've already got a primary damage dealer and a secondary damage dealer, right? Which happens a lot when we've got Rebirth Raven on our team. And what makes it so good for defense is this synergy of all the abilities. So what it's saying is 90% of splash damage gets pulled onto the character holding Ninjato, and 50% of that gets dissipated, meaning teammates only get hit with 10% of the original splash damage, which is great when you're facing one of those nukes that tag in, like Luchador Bane with League of Assassins Knives. The holder gets 45% of what would have been the splash damage, so half of that 90%, in addition to the original special damage.
That's if they're the person in front.
Yeah. Right. So 40% boosted health means there's a better chance of surviving that special and splash damage. And 300% of received splash damage becomes power. Yeah. So, and we talked about it, how that mechanic works, right? In a Q&A a long time ago. But so the percentage of health that you lose is tripled, and you get that as a percentage of power. So let's say you lose a third of your health, you get 100% of your power filled. So damage reflection is good. 16% doesn't feel like a lot in most cases. And to me, the biggest limitation of using it on our own team is that, the really big potential splash damage cards, Lucha Bane, any of the Batgirls, and they so rarely get a chance to hit us unblocked, taking up an entire gear slot to generate the power for those specific situations. I feel like it doesn't happen enough to get full value for 1 in 9 slots.
There's definitely like a limited use case and utility.
Right. So it's got way more value on a team if you're playing Leave It in defense for multiplayer. Mm-hmm. Now, even, that being said, it is a huge problem. I don't like facing it in multiplayer because if we're playing a team that relies a lot on splash damage, it's hard when,
Yeah, it can be pretty annoying.
They tag in and has a bunch of power. So if you're doing splash and have Tentu Totem and someone's coming in with lots of power because of the Ninjato after their teammate is knocked out and you get your power back from Tentu Totem, it becomes a bit of a race to see who gets to do the special first. And you can sometimes win the race if you're both doing specials, but I feel like I don't ever win the race if we're both trying to do supers.
Yeah.
And
or if they're trying to do super, because we're not often trying to do supers.
Right. And that's why sometimes, Enchantress Companion gear is a good other gear to have on somebody only to lock them out so they're less likely to be able to do it to you if they've got Ninjato. Mm-hmm. And we've talked at length about the different weird effects. I mean, maybe go back to the last video that we did on this back in June, I think you said 4th, 2024. Where we talk about the way sometimes if the opponent's got Ninjato, you'll just get your power back for no reason.
Yeah.
Really. I think that's it. It's because it's a splash damage with Master's Death cards. That there's a synergy when it's on opposite teams, basically.
Yeah. So there we go. Moving on to the store, we have the Antimatter Sinestro pack that is for $24.99 Canadian dollars.
The only currency that matters.
Yeah, and also the currency that we have access to. So it's the information that we have to give you. It's included next week's. It doesn't come with credits, so it's especially overpriced, right? Sometimes you get $12 or $12.99 no credits, or $24 with or $25, I guess, yeah, with 100,000 credits
and the card.
But this is $25, no credits.
Yeah.
We also have the Ultimate Bundle Bringers of Justice in for its second week, as well as the Blackest Night pack.
Is it the second week or maybe first week?
Oh, sorry.
I can't remember. You know what? Are we getting caught up? Maybe it is I think it might be the first week.
Okay, Ultimate Bundle Bringers of Justice. That's for $124.99. It contains 10 of the best heroes, in their words. New 52 Superman, Dawn of Justice Batman, Dawn of Justice Wonder Woman, Injustice 2 Aquaman, Earth 2 The Flash, Yellow Lantern Hal Jordan, Martian Manhunter, Rebirth Green Arrow, Earth 2 Hawkgirl, and Arkham Knight Batgirl. So these are all challenge characters except for Dawn of Justice Batman. Yeah,
he was previously a random drop in a pack. And I think if there's going to be that's sort of the real prize in that pack, but it's just so expensive if that's the only thing you want. I mean, it's not an awful deal per character, but I'm thinking that the number of people who want all those characters is pretty small.
Yeah, and who want all those characters and also have $125 to spare.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also have the Blackest Night pack, and that one is in its second week.
Right,
yeah,
right.
So there we go. Phantom Zone is finished.
It's going to be finished.
Or it's about to be finished.
Yeah, this is today's the last day. It's funny how I don't know how they decided to suddenly change the time of day when they're going to change things over on Thursday.
Yeah. And it will be gone for this week and next week, and then we'll be back after that.
Right.
Fight 62 is still broken. Last weekend's breakthrough for goals was Catwoman, Deathstroke, and Raven. So this coming weekend should be Cyborg, Batgirl, and Black Adam.
Yeah.
We have a link in the description to a thread from Devlin16 that goes over the complete breakthrough cycle if you want to check that out for yourself. And as far as current glitches go, we go into more detail every time something changes, or on the first week of every month, which was the 5th of June 2025 most recently. But nothing has changed, so we won't go into any significant amount of detail. The only real thing that is worth mentioning is that the challenge reset method has been confirmed to be working on this week's Blackest Night Batman challenge.
Right.
So there we go. And I think that does it for this week.
Yep.
To finish up, we'd like to give a huge thank you to our lovely patrons on Patreon. That is Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi127, and Nora Klimek and Miguel, who are supporting us on the credited level. And also a huge thank you to all of you for watching and supporting us however you do. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.